Well, first of all, thank you, Alice, and thank you for all the organizers for bringing us together. This is absolutely wonderful. So thanks again. I'm going to talk about this Paratreat project. Let me start by mentioning that our collaboration is known for working with computer scientists. So when Joachim Stadl first wrote PKD-Grav, he had this three-layer programming model that he didn't invent out of whole cloth. He was consulting with people doing parallel language development in the computer science department at the University of Washington. And then probably everybody understands that Changa was co-developed with the University of Illinois Parallel Programming Lab led by Sanjay Kale. And so this project is essentially a continuation of that collaboration. I want to point out that a lot of the work was done by a computer science undergraduate, Joseph Hutter, at the University of Illinois. So let's talk about Changa, the good and the bad. So we've been right here are some of the successes. It's fast. I think this is a particular success, say, exemplified by how Phil Chang has been able to use the neighbor finding network framework to develop moving mesh code. But there are difficulties. I'll point out this one in particular. Implementing radiative transfer was a bit more difficult than I had anticipated. And so trying to figure out how to make that better. Well, we've got too much to do. Let's look at this one. And here's just an example of what we've done so far in, say, producing new trees. And the situation is sometimes the octree that we normally use for gravity isn't the best for situations. This particular situation is a protoplanetary disk. And so it's a flat thing. And so that division you have to make in the Z direction every time actually leads to great inefficiencies. And changing the tree type from a regular octree to this long division tree, I'll call it, can result in substantial speed up. By the way, this is work done in collaboration with Spencer Wallace. Sorry. And I'm out of time. So next steps, how much I'm going to incorporate into Changa is a big question, but what I'm really looking for is maybe users to try, well, users as in co-developers to try new algorithms in this framework. So with that, I'll take questions.
Hi, how do I flip slides, this thing?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm here from McMaster, and many of my students are here too, and some of them will talk later. So what I wanted to talk about was sort of to advertise the idea that we invest as a group in doing a new standard set of cosmology zooms. And we previously used the MUG set for this, and MUGS was developed primarily with a lot of work by Greg Stinson around 2010. And the idea with MUGS was you don't just pick a random set of galaxies, you choose them so they're statistically representative. So this means that with 20 galaxies, you actually represent galaxies with high spins, with late and early merger histories, etc. So you actually represent a diverse set of galaxies that collectively would give you a representation of the full galaxy population that is comparable to, say, 100 or so with just 20. But MUGS was developed using the old tools, and one of the issues is that adding resolution or changes like that is challenging. It's also an older cosmology. It also is a relatively narrow mass range, so we want to extend that down to dwarfs because there's a lot of interesting science people in this room are doing with dwarfs. And ultimately, we want this to be a bit of a general project. We want the ICs to be public so people are using. I think we all acknowledge that Agora has been great in providing a public IC that lots of people can use. And we also want it to be an evolving project. So we'll start in a simple way. with sort of a dark matter large box selection, but then maybe we want to do some sub-selections and extend a sample based on their gas properties, for example, and add some resolution and get some dwarfs in that volume and so on. Now, this has been informal discussion with me and Ben Keller and Ching Shen, but I'm happy to have anyone involved. For my group, we tend to do more technical work, so this is actually more of integrating the N-body community, and I want to be part of that and enable projects. And there's a lot of projects we can do. One of the ones we've discussed is a comparison, and we don't mean talking to a bunch of groups and then waiting 3 years for stuff that never happens. We're thinking of doing this in-house. So Ben has an Arepo version. Marta Reina Campos has a Gizmo version. We're talking to Oscar and potentially Hector for Ramses and me for Chonga Gasoline. So this is a quick comparison just to establish a baseline and how these codes compare. Then does that really work for dwarfs? If you shrink everything by a factor of 10 or 100 in mass for all the particles, does it still work? Our best galaxy efforts. But then we can just sort of parade onwards through, I think, a dozen papers at least in terms of exploring lots of physics of joint interest here within a standard set that we all know. And hopefully that can be a test bed for new physics as well, and the RT that is very close, and Bernard will talk about. But essentially, I see it as a resource for student-sized projects. I know many of us here either are students or have summer students or upcoming grad students, and we want to develop a resource that is a good size for student projects. And I'm advertising this because I want to talk about it while I'm here. I also want to talk about Bespoke a little bit. Alex Pettit will give the details. So he's not here in person. I'm the local, in-person person. So I won't talk about this slide at all. Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is Hector Robinson.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Yes, my name is Hector. I'm the first of James students from McMaster University. Today, I'm going to be telling you about some of the simulations I've been doing. So I'm really interested in magnetic fields and their effects on galaxy evolution and the interstellar medium. So James and I decided what we wanted to do for this was run some simulations in Ramses, actually. So here's just the setup for my simulations. The setup is the Agora isolated galaxy simulation. I don't really have time to go into it, but that's the setup. I've essentially copied the Agora setup, but I've added magnetic fields to the initial conditions. So you can see I've got 4 different galaxies that I've run here. The top row is just the surface density map of the galaxy. They're all identical. And then in the bottom row, you can see that's the magnetic field strength. And those, you can see there's 4 different ones. So I've got a hydro galaxy on the left. That's kind of the control with no magnetic fields. And then I've got 3 that have the same magnetic field configuration, just with increasing magnetic field strength to the right, and each of them increased by about a factor of 10 in magnetic field strength. So the idea here with running an isolated galaxy is a very sort of nice environment to test different pieces of physics. So it's very controlled, and we can just try to isolate the effects. What are the effects of the magnetic fields? So this is the initial setup. Here's what it looks like after I run them for 500 megayears. You can see at the top, the hydro and the galaxy with the weak fields look quite similar. And then as we start to go to the right, they start to look a little different. So you can see in the surface density, one of the first things we see is that as we increase the magnetic field strength, we start to get much more prominent spiral arm features in the gas. And then on the far right, you can see it looks much different. That's the one with strong magnetic fields. You can see there's much higher surface density overall. That's because generally there's just less star formation that happens. That's the surface density, but you can see the magnetic fields also evolve as well. You can see by the end, they're still quite different from each other, but maybe I convince you that if I go back, they're less different than they were at the start. And the reason is because the magnetic fields are amplifying naturally through various dynamo processes. And this goes on throughout the simulation. So we're evolving the galaxy and the magnetic fields at the same time. So I didn't want to go much deeper than that, so I'll skip over my other slides. I'll just say, overall, the magnetic fields kind of tend to puff up the galaxies. They can lower star formation and regulate star formation. They affect the spiral arm development. And going forwards, there's more I want to do. I want to look at field morphology. So if I start with different configurations of the magnetic field, how will that change the behavior? I want to characterize the turbulence a little more, which might take some higher resolution simulations. And I want to characterize the properties of the clouds in the simulations that form. Likely the magnetic fields affect their distribution and morphology. That's it.
All right, thank you. People have done an amazing job of sticking to their 3-minute time. That's awesome. Okay, our last speaker of this block is Robert Vissing, and then after this, we'll open things up for questions for all our Flash Talk speakers.
Thank you. So I will continue a bit on what Hector, in a sense, but with a different code. So this is basically simulations done with gasoline, so using MHD. So here we, in a similar way, also use the Agora IC. However, compared to Hector, we have relaxed it with a high Jeans floor. So we actually have a very cold initial conditions to begin with. And the purpose of this work was actually to try to investigate the numerical dependencies of MHD, or basically the galactic dynamo within SPH. So, and this is important because we want to know what are the resolution constraints and what environments do we need to actually capture the observed magnetic fields. And we can see we have a bit of a video here. See if it works. Doesn't work. Okay, sadly. No, it starts. Okay, great. So what you have initially, because it's a very cold state, you have a starburst, and then you have the magnetic field amplifying mainly actually in the spiral arm region of the disk. And this can actually is very consistent with mean field dynamo, because you can, if you look at the polarity of the field, you can also see that you have mean field, large mean fields generating. And we also looked at several other parameters. So we did some runs with no feedback, and here we have gravitational instability. And there the amplification is very dependent on what, how much fragmentation occurs within the disk. And basically what you set the smallest collapsing scale will basically be the main determining factor. And then if you add feedback, what happens is actually you have two different effects. You have one which is actually a destructive effect, especially when you have an isolator, right? Because you don't have any particles in the CGM to begin with, basically, right? So what happens is you have a starburst and you just push a lot of flux out basically into the CGM, right? And this actually removes a lot of magnetic fields from the disk. And then you also have a positive effect, which is that you increase vertical motions, which is very important for the mean field dynamo. We also looked at resolution dependence, and there is a very high resolution dependence. So basically we're nowhere near convergence, because you can see as you increase resolution, you do basically just get faster and faster amplification of the magnetic field. However, you can see that for the medium resolution, the saturation level actually, because at the low resolution, we have a big dependence on the feedback model. However, at the medium resolution, the saturation level always reaches about 10 to 30% of the thermal energy. We also looked a bit on numerical dissipation. So basically changing what the numerical dissipation is within the code. And we also had looked a bit on the numerical prime number and the magnetic Reynolds numbers, because these are important in how effective the dynamo is. And prime number can be seen to be below unity in all our runs. Magnetic Reynolds number is about 10 to 200, which is around the critical for small scale dynamo. So it is unsure if we have small scale dynamo or not in these simulations. And we also did some tests with initial magnetic field, but due to the big starburst initially, you actually remove a lot of the flux. So it doesn't have that big of an effect. That's my talk. And yeah, ask me later. There's a lot here, so this is a very short. Thank you.
All right, so we have time for some questions. If people have questions in the chat, we have a first question in the chat. So from Stephen Goff Kelly, for Hector Robinson, you mentioned strong magnetic fields provide pressure and puff up your models. By what factor does the strong magnetic field thicken the disk compared to the control with no magnetic field?
So that's a good question. So it really affects the disk quite dramatically the strong one, that's because I've increased magnetic fields by 100 times in that case. So really, in that case, the disk doesn't collapse down. So you get a scale height that's much higher. I don't have an exact number, probably twice as high. But really, the star formation in that disk is really limited. There's almost no star formation that happens just because it's totally magnetically supported.
Yep.
Can I ask a follow-on question? Oh, yeah, I'm Andrew Punson. Well, is there any sensitivity to how the magnetic field is aligned relative to the spin axis, rather than just the magnetic field strength, or is that just erased by the dynamo?
Yep, there is. I believe so. My initial condition has the magnetic fields sort of circular along the disk, so that sort of gives you magnetic pressure perpendicular to the disk, which holds it up. I haven't run any galaxies where I've started with a different initial configuration. I'm working on that currently. I imagine there would be different results, but I can't say exactly what it would do.
All right. Yep. Go for it.
Hi, this is Philip Chang. This question is for Tom Quinn. So the question is like for paratreat, is the vision that you have basically paratreat is going to eventually replace Chang'e, or is the algorithms in paratreat going to be migrated into Chang'e?
Probably both, right? There's some minor features I think could be ported directly into Chang'e. For example, the better SMP cache. But then sort of the tree walk, that kind of infrastructure would be hard to replace. So that might be a totally new application.
Shade Marie. So in the MHD simulations, is your initial field tangled or uniform, and have you played with that?
They're very smooth. They're just purely circular fields, all aligned. There's no tangling in the initial condition. This is actually something we want to do, is put in a tangled field, but it's hard because we have to satisfy that the field is divergence free. So it's hard to set up initial magnetic fields. So that's something we're still working on.
Yeah, I was thinking with the circular.
Could you use your seat mic, please?
Is it well? Okay. So my question was, when you put in circular, right? Because you have density gradients to begin with, right? It won't be divergentless in a sense. So how do you actually fix that? So one way we try with vector potentials, for example, and do with that. I'm not sure how you do.
Yeah, we've looked into using those as well.
Yeah.
It's not perfect, but it's a tricky problem overall.
Okay.
But yeah, that's what we've looked into using.
To queue up our first talk by Victor Di Battista.
Can I just quickly ask, I can't see the screen first of all, and how do we get slides? How do we change slides? Is somebody going to change slides? Sorry, I can't hear anyone. Sorry, is somebody going to change slides for us, or how is this going to function? Sorry, I can't hear anyone.
If you'd like to share your slides, you're welcome to now.
Oh, you want me to share my slides? Okay.
We can do it for you. We have them ready.
I can do either way. Either way is fine, but if you can't change my slides, I will need to use my own slides. That's fine. Is it? Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so why don't we just go off the version that I have? So yeah, thank you all for attending this session. For
Sorry, do you
so
mind
my
putting your
group is
slides into
interested in.
presentation mode for us?
This is presentation mode there now, right? Yes.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. Right. So I'm presenting this for a member of my group, João Amarante, who could not be here today. If you're interested in his results, you can go to the link over there for his webpage to see what he's up to. This is a project we started running a suite of simulations to try to understand the early evolution of the Milky Way. We're calling this the Gastro Project. And as you know, there's the Gaia data now, and we want to try to understand how the early halo of the Milky Way formed. There is now very convincing evidence of the Gaia sausage Enceladus merger early in the history of the Milky Way, about 10 gigayears ago. But there's also a lot of other stuff that has been identified, and some of this has been thought to be separate mergers in the early history of the Milky Way. And in particular, the one I want to focus on is this one over here, which is known as the Sequoia. There you go, it's metal poor, it's more metal poor compared to the Gaia sausage. And it's retrograde. If you look at the angular momentum, it's counter-rotating. And so this has been thought to be a separate merger, but one of the quick results we've shown so far is that in this particular paper, this is probably not a separate merger. This is probably just part of the Gaia sausage merger itself. If we look at if we look in the plane of energy versus angular momentum, we have a metal-rich part at the lowest energies, and the metal-poor part over here. This is the Sequoia. And in our simulations, we find that when we drop satellites into Milky Way-like systems, the components with the lowest energy, so the most easily unbound components of the satellite, the highest angular momentum, so again, easily unbound, eventually end up settling in this part of the energy angular momentum space. So if we look at the overall merger remnant, it's this metal-rich component, and the counter-rotating component, the very retrograde material, is more metal poor, and that's consistent with what we observed for the Sequoia and the Milky Way. That's the presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so our next speaker is Stuart Anderson. Stuart, do you want to share your slides?
Sure, will do. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, let me just share my screen. I'll leave my video off. I don't trust my Wi-Fi to survive that. So, okay, presentation mode, right?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, morning everybody. I'm Stuart Anderson. I'm working with Victor in the University of Central Lancashire. So what we've done, I want to present to you some studies that we did from N-body and SPH simulations looking at barred galaxies. The bar is the bar-like structure at the center of many, many disk galaxies that we observe out there. I've got a couple of examples of these bar galaxies here, 1436 and 1291. And if we march along the major axis of the bar and look at the surface brightness profiles, we see two basic forms out there in nature. We see an exponential form at the top, and we see one at the bottom that's more flat. It almost looks like a sort of a shoulder type profile. And we wanted to use simulations to explore this phenomenon. What's the difference between the exponential and the flat profile? The classic paper that discerned these, that identified these two types of profiles was Elmgreen and Elmgreen in 1985. So we call these shoulders. Here's an example from one of our simulations of shoulders. That's the picture on the left is the bar structure. You can see the profile at the bottom with the shoulder marked there. The shoulder borders here are in gray, and you can get weak shoulders, medium strength shoulders, and very, very strong shoulders based on the flatness. And we wrote an algorithm to explore this phenomenon. It's based on radius of curvature. It identifies where the shoulders are. It identifies the length of them and the strength. And so what we did was we ran the simulations for 10 gigayears. And I think there were 17 simulations that we had. Most of them were N-body with one SPH. And these are sort of time-lapse views. So the red markers are where the algorithm detects a flat profile in the bar. So each line here, each time here represents the bar profile from 1 gigayear all the way up to 10 at the top. And you can see the shoulders sort of, there's some early transient shoulders, and then they stabilize and they kind of persist in many models. And in some models, they appear and they can be suddenly destroyed by events like buckling and so on. But what we found in all of our simulations is that when the bar is growing is when these things appear. So we got a hint that the flat bar profile is a sign of bar growth. To prove that, we ran a simulation where we forced the bar that it couldn't grow. We stopped it growing. We spanned the halo up, maximum spin, so the bar could not give up angular momentum to the halo, so it didn't grow. And what we found was that there were no flat profiles throughout the entire evolution of that model. A few transients here and there, but no stable shoulders. So we see this as evidence that the flat profile means the bar is growing. But there are some circumstances under which that flat profile can be destroyed back to exponential. So a couple of takeaway messages. We believe that flat profiles are a sign of bar growth, and that if the bars are not growing, you won't get shoulders. But there are circumstances when those flat profiles can be destroyed, like buckling and spiral interference means that you can't use the profile to determine whether it's a young bar or an old bar. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Wonderful, great. Stephen Goff Kelly, do you want to project your slides? It's a beautiful desktop image.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's our observatory out at UCLan. Bear with me one moment. Fantastic. Is that coming through?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, good morning, everyone. Apologies for another one of Victor's students from UCLan, but I will just get stuck right in. So bars have been shown to be primary drivers of secular evolution in the central regions of disk galaxies. In 2017, De Battista et al. Showed that using pure N-body models, that populations separate in the presence of a bar depending on their initial radial velocity dispersion. So initially kinematically hot populations in a disk evolve into a rounder distribution with a weak bar, whereas kinematically cold distributions evolve into a population that has a very strong bar and can also form a box peanut bulge with supporting kinematics in each case. They went on to show, using an N-body plus a gas simulation, that initial radial velocity dispersion correlates with stellar properties like age and metallicity, which means the separation of populations is also a function of these properties. Bergudi et al. In 2020 demonstrated a similar result with a gravity gas cosmological zoom-in simulation of Milky Way-like galaxies using the Auriga initial conditions, and populations separated by metallicity show a transition from a boxy peanut morphology to a rounder distribution as you decrease in metallicity. Now, large volume magnetohydrodynamical simulations, cosmological simulations, are now reaching resolutions where we can begin to capture the influence of the bars accurately. So using the highest resolution run of the illustrious TNG simulation, TNG 50, we've begun to explore bar-driven secular evolution in a sample of order 300 barred galaxies. So such a large self-consistent sample allows us to discover general trends in how bars influence the in situ populations, as well as understand influences on bar dynamics from external sources. In our work, we've been able to find that the same effect of the separation of populations as a function of age matches what we see in the isolated simulations, but there's several discrepancies when we compare the results from TNG 50 to observe trends in barred galaxies in the local universe from observations. And that's a very quick whistle tour. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Our last speaker of this Flash Talk session is Virginia Cuomo. Can
Hello.
you share your slides?
Yes, I will turn the camera off and share my screen. Okay, so can you see? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your
Okay.
screen. Thanks.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. My name is Virginia Cuomo from University of Atacama, and today I will tell you about evidences of a past buckling events in edge-on barred galaxies, the results from simulation and observational data. This work is done in collaboration with the Galaxy Dynamics group at the University of Central Lancashire. So during its evolution, a bar can experience an unstable phase called the buckling instability. During this event, the bar bends along the vertical direction and breaks the asymmetry with respect to the midplane, as you can see here from the edge-on view of this modeled galaxy. So the buckling instability usually is used to explain the formation of waxy peanut-shaped bulges, the BB bulges, which are common structure observed in the central part of many massive barred galaxies, including our own Milky Way. So they are considered to be the vertical thick inner bar regions, and they can be identified as X-shaped structure when the galaxy is observed edge-on. Since they are common structure, they must play an important role in the coevolution with the host galaxy. So it is important to understand their formation scenario. Beside the bar buckling, BP bulges are expected to form as well through trapping of these stars onto resonant orbit. So the question arises whether it is possible to distinguish between the two proposed formation scenario for BP bulges. Since the buckling instability is short-lived, it is very difficult to be catched in the act. But this breaks the asymmetry in the density distribution of the particles or of the stars with respect to the midplane. And this midplane asymmetry lasts for a long time. So it is possible to catch this asymmetry. So we develop a diagnostic to identify it and try to apply our diagnostic to real galaxies. So to do that, we adopt two different models. Here you can see the three projection, face-on, edge-on, and side-on of the models. We have model D5, which is a pure n-body simulation where the bar suffer for a buckling event and develop a BP bulge, which look already a little bit asymmetric with respect to the midplane when we observe the side-on, the edge-on view. And we have an SPH model, AG1, in which the bar appear and BP bulge as well develop, but with no buckling event. We develop our diagnostic which is working only if the galaxy is observed edge-on. Here you can see the image of the density particle and the unsharp mask with which we reveal the X-shaped structure associated to the BP bulge. And here you can see for the model D5 that it is already visible by eye that there is a little asymmetry with respect to the midplane. And then we build the asymmetry map by subtracting from the edge-on image the same image after rotating it by 180 degrees and normalizing. And this allows to identify the region that hosts an asymmetric distribution of the particles. Then, and which are located just outside the X-shaped region. Moreover, if we collapse this asymmetry map along the vertical direction, we can get the asymmetry profile, which presents this typical double-peaked shape, which again highlight the presence, the region of the asymmetry. You can see that for the G1 model, there is no asymmetry in the map and a flat profile. We then apply our diagnostic to a small sample of earbird galaxies, which are host in a BP bulge and which are observed within the Spitzer survey of stellar structure in galaxies. We do found 2 asymmetric galaxies and 2 symmetric ones. Actually, we demonstrated that the asymmetry in the 2 asymmetric galaxies are actually due to inclination effect rather than a past buckling event. So our result is that we do not find a clear evidence of a recent buckling event in the observed, in the analyzed galaxies. So probably buckling could be a rare event in the recent past of the studied galaxies. And the observed BP bulges may be formed in a long time ago or through resonant trapping rather than buckling. Thank you for the attention and for this opportunity.
All right, so question time. I'm going to monitor the chat. Is there anyone either online or in the room who has a question for any of our speakers? Allison, go ahead.
Yeah, a question for Virginia on your conclusions there. That's very interesting to me. Is there a reason you might expect buckling to decline in the recent universe, or thoughts on that?
Well, actually, we do not expect buckling to decline, but we did not find the confirmation that buckling is frequent in the local universe. But this is a pilot project, so we might need to enlarge the sample to apply our diagnostic to give a stronger conclusion about this.
Great. Any other questions? All right. In that case, let us thank our speakers once again. All right, so Allison informs me that Martin Ray is taking his wife to the ER for a bike accident. So so we are missing that talk. We've heard that things are okay, but still, you know, you got to get things checked out. So we're missing our next Martin's talk, so we're going to go straight on to hear what Anna Wright has to say about stellar halos.
Great. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Wright, and I'm a postdoc at Johns Hopkins University. So given that this is the N-Body Shop workshop, I know most of the talks that will be given over the next couple of days are probably going to be about simulations that were run with gasoline or Chang'e. However, while I'm definitely still working with simulations from those codes, most of my recent research has actually been in analyzing simulations run with ENSO. I've specifically been examining stellar halos in the Foggy simulation suite. So Foggy, oh, there we go. Okay, so Foggy, as you can see in the upper corner here, Foggy stands for Figuring Out Gas and Galaxies in ENSO. I've listed my collaborators on this project on the bottom here. Most are at Johns Hopkins or Space Telescope, although part of the Foggy team is also at Michigan State University. Currently, we have a suite of 6 roughly Milky Way mass galaxies run with ENSO, and what makes these simulations kind of unique is that we focus a lot of our resolution power on the areas kind of around the galaxies rather than just in the disks. So the image that I've shown in the background here is of the gas density in one of our simulations, and you can see that there's an incredible amount of structure present. Now, most of our group actually does focus on this gas, which is known as the circumgalactic medium, and which I think we have a session on later. but I work on the stars in these simulations. And specifically, I study the stars that are located kind of on the outskirts of the galaxies, those that make up the stellar halo. So while most of the stars in our galaxy are confined to the disk, we also know that our galaxy and many others are surrounded by an extremely faint halo of stars that extends far beyond the disk. However, even though the stellar halo is very low density, very low surface brightness, it has an amazing amount of structure. We tend to think of simulations as not really having surface brightness limits in the same way that observations do, but that's a little bit misleading. In a low resolution simulation, high mass star particles can limit the amount of structure that you see, especially in low surface brightness regions. For instance, a shell like the one that is just barely visible on the outskirts of this galaxy might only be made up of a couple of star particles in a low resolution simulation, so you wouldn't even know that that structure was there. So in order to combat this, the foggy simulations are run with fairly high resolution star particles. We employ a scheme where the star particle mass ramps up over time. So the oldest star particles, which make up the majority of low surface brightness regions like the stellar halo, are born with 1,000 solar masses, and then over time, the star formation birth mass increases. Now, looking at the stellar halo, some of the stars that occupy it were actually born in the central disk of the galaxy and then got eventually moved outward. But most of the stars were not born in the central disk. The existence of stellar halos is largely a consequence of the fact that galaxies grow hierarchically. So I'm going to show you a video of the formation of one of our stellar halos. There we go. Okay. So on the lower right, what you're going to see is all the stars. This is every star that ends up bound to the central galaxy at redshift 0. And then in each of the other boxes, what you're going to see is just an individual galaxy. It's the same view, but we've only included the particles from a single galaxy. So there's the first one. And we've given each of these galaxies a color so that you can pick it out both in its own box and in the main box where everything is going to be jumbled together. And if you look at the main panel on the lower right, you can see that the large stellar halo that this galaxy is developing over time is largely made up of stars from other galaxies that have fallen into its gravitational potential and then been torn apart by tidal forces. And as the remnants of these galaxies orbit the central galaxy, they form these incredibly complex streams of stars. And what's neat is that in the stellar halo, dynamical times are long enough that we can see the imprints of these accretion events billions of years after they happen. And this means that we can potentially use stellar halos to learn about the properties of dwarf galaxies that were destroyed a long, long time ago. We don't have to limit ourselves to just the surviving population. So backing up a little, most of what we know about stellar halos comes from observations of the Milky Way or Andromeda. And this is largely because stellar halos are incredibly faint. You can see that I've had to completely saturate the disk of this galaxy just to make the stellar halo visible. And as a result of that, stellar halos simply aren't going to be detectable by most surveys. There are research teams like Pandas and Ghosts that have used deep observations to study them, but these kinds of observations face another challenge, which is the size of stellar halos. If we took this galaxy, we placed it at 5 megaparsecs, and we observed it with Hubble, this is what we'd see of the stellar halo, which is not much. We'd have to do a lot of pointings to map the stellar halo. However, with the upcoming Roman Space Telescope, we would actually be able, it has a field of view equivalent to 100 Hubbles, so we would actually be able to image the entire stellar halo in a single observation. Now, as a quick disclaimer, my research is funded by the Roman project, so I'm pretty much contractually obligated to tell you how cool Roman data is going to be, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's untrue. So one of the things that I'm currently working on is making predictions for what we can expect Roman to see when we use it to observe nearby stellar halos. So the question that I'm really most interested in answering is how well we can expect Roman to be able to disentangle the kind of complicated streams of stars that make up a stellar halo into the individual galaxies in which they formed, and how we can optimize observations for that purpose. So can we take an image of a full stellar halo like the one on the left here, and can we decompose it into the individual galaxy contributions that we see on the right? The answer is that we likely can't do it as cleanly as we can in a simulation where we know the ground truth, but we can certainly work towards that. For instance, we can identify some of the more distinctive structures, like these streams, by using software like the Hoff Stream Spotter, which looks for linear structures in position data in stars. But what about when stars don't align nicely like they do with these streams? Do we still have a chance at learning something about individual destroyed dwarfs? So far, based on our simulations, I am optimistic on that point. The plot that I'm showing here is that same stellar halo that I was just showing a more realistic image of, but averaged over 100 different lines of sight and colored by how many individual galaxies contributed stars to each pixel. And each pixel is about 100 by 100 Roman pixels. So if we're looking towards the center of this galaxy, we are probably seeing stars that were originally formed in about 40 different dwarf galaxies plus whatever's in the disk. However, if we're surveying out beyond 50 kiloparsecs, this drops down to single digits. There we go. Okay, so this is a version of the same plot rescaled to highlight the outer regions of the halo. And you can see that, especially in the outer 100 kiloparsecs or so, we're usually only seeing stars that were formed in a couple of different galaxies. Now that at face value seems promising, but it's not terribly useful if it's still 40 different galaxies and the stellar surface densities are just so low that each pixel is only seeing stars from one halo. So let's take a slightly clearer view of this. So we can look at this kind of like a little bit more practically by surveying a slightly wider variety of areas of the halo than just the little 100 by 100 Roman pixels. So the plot I'm showing here has on the x-axis galactocentric distance, and on the y-axis, it's the radius of the circle that you could search and only find stars from fewer than n dwarfs. And here runs from 1 to 5, and each of those has a different shade associated with it. So for instance, if we're searching out at 100 kiloparsecs from the center of the galaxy, and we want to see, we want to find a region that's containing contributors from only one galaxy, so fewer than 2, so that's that yellow band. We can search a circle with a radius of just under about a kiloparsec. And we would on average only see stars that were contributed by one dwarf galaxy. For reference, that area is a little bit larger than about 500 Roman pixels squared at 5 megaparsecs, which is about 2% of one of Roman's 18 detectors. So this is something that's certainly going to be doable with Roman. Now, another thing that may help us identify stars that came from individual dwarf galaxy contributors is that if a galaxy is close enough for us to resolve individual stars on its stellar halo, we can get a lot more information about those stars than simply their positions. For instance, we might be able to derive their ages. So by and large, the stars that we've observed to make up the stellar halo of Milky Way mass galaxies are very old and very metal poor. And typically, the older a star is, the larger the uncertainties on its age become. However, if we have just a little bit of diversity in the stellar halo, for instance, stars that formed inside of a slightly later infalling satellite that had just a little bit more time to form stars before getting quenched, we have a better shot at identifying the structures produced by that dwarf. So in this plot, I've shown one random line of sight on the same halo I've been showing. And each of the pixels is colored by the width of the age interquartile range for the stars that contribute to it. So it's the difference between the lowest 25th percentile of the ages and the highest 25th percentile of the ages. So looking at the halo, you can see that in most of it, there isn't a whole lot of diversity. Stars tend to vary by, on average, about 2 billion years in age. And given that they're old, that is not going to be enough for us to distinguish between, a 10 billion-year-old star versus a 12 billion-year-old star. However, there is an area, this kind of bright orange and yellow plumes, where we do see an age interquartile range of 6 billion years. And this is due to a slightly late infalling satellite. So if we took this stellar halo, we observed it with Roman, would we actually be able to pick out that these structures are different and thereby potentially identify the remnants of this specific dwarf contributor? So here in orange is an isochrone on a CMD and a couple of Roman filters depicting the low end of this age interquartile range. So this is a population that's 5 billion years old. And in purple here is the other end of that age interquartile range. This is a population that's about 11 billion years old. And there are certainly parts of the CMD where we would not be able to tell the difference probably between these two isochrones. But even given the uncertainties that we're likely to see, the region kind of around the main sequence turnoff here, as well as this kind of AGB post-AGB zone, those are differences that should be easily discernible. Now, one of the main Roman surveys that's planned is the high latitude survey, which is going to cover 1,700 square degrees of the sky, and we'll get down to a limiting magnitude of about 28 magnitudes. At 5 megaparsecs, that is here. And that does mean that we're probably, we're not going to be able to see the main sequence turn off for a lot of the galaxies that Roman will be seeing. However, we will certainly be able to see the AGB post-AGB zone. And the benefit of this is that it is a good way to tell us which halos deserve a second look, which ones we should either be taking a deeper image of with Roman, or we should be doing targeted observations of with HST or JWST. So I'm going to throw up my takeaways here. These are primarily that stellar halos around Milky Way-like galaxies are made up of a lot of different stars formed in a lot of different galaxies, mostly dwarfs. Roman's going to allow us to survey stellar halos in a way we've never ever been able to do before, which is really exciting. And that means that we can hopefully recover properties of dwarf galaxies that were destroyed billions of years ago. And the more diverse those dwarfs are, the more diverse the stellar halo is, better chance we have of figuring out what ended up making up that stellar halo.
All right, so I'm going to take a comment from the chat and then go to Tom, because the comment came in right on the last slide. Okay, from Ben Keller, question for Anna. Have you compared the foggy halos to the surface brightnesses and density profiles from Dragonfly observations? Merit Plus 2020 found that illustrious TNG halos had 1 to 2 decks higher surface densities at greater than 20 kpc distances compared to the observations. Does foggy do better?
Right. So the Merit did incredibly careful comparisons. So I'm actually in the process of working on that right now. Based on preliminary analysis, my guess is that we do have a little bit of kind of extra weight in our stellar halos. But I haven't done the kind of careful analysis that Merit did, and so I can't answer definitely yet. I can say, let's see, there we go. I have compared the masses of the foggy stellar halos to the Dragonfly stellar halos. This is a bunch of different definitions of the mass. The one that's really closest to the one that I've been using to define the stellar halo is this upper left here, which is R greater than 5 RD, which is the disk scale length. And all the observations are marked with uncertainties. The foggy halos are in red. And you can see that the foggy halos they're on the massive side, but they're definitely in the right realm. The question is that mass distributed in a reasonable way? Or are we seeing too much on the outskirts?
Okay, great, thanks. Tom?
Anna, fascinating stuff. Will Roman give any metallicity information? Have you looked into that?
A little bit. So it's got a prism, but it's going to be pretty low resolution. So I've been told not to depend on Roman's ability to get metallicity information. It's possible that the prospects for that will improve in the next few years because Roman won't be launching until most recent data I heard quoted was late 2026, so probably somewhere around there. But at least Jason Tomlinson has told me not to depend on the metallicity information being present or highly dependable.
Okay, yep, go ahead.
Hi, name's Alex Liu. I have a question about that animation that you showed earlier. So those streams of galaxies right, that are falling sort of in. Have you examined sort of what are the mechanisms causing those large stream-like structures? Is it like tidal stripping or?
Yeah, so it's by and large just tidal stripping. We see from at least from what we can tell from observations, which means just one tiny frame in here, that it seems to be. I mean, you could get the same thing essentially with an N-body simulation. It's literally just the differences in the tidal forces ripping these galaxies apart. And of course, it's a little complex because you've got the central galaxy, but then you may also have, fairly significant mergers happening. So you're probably, if you wanted to approximate gravity as being nicely spherical, that's probably not a great way to do it with tidal forces. But yeah, it's just tidal forces.
Okay, thank you.
Or, yeah.
Okay, I gotta say that blue galaxy in particular has a pretty intriguing tidal stream structure. There's
Oh
something
yeah.
there's something torquing that
Oh yeah.
system. Okay, so there's one question for you from Charlotte. Charlotte, did you want to just ask it out loud?
Yeah, that would be
Or-
great.
Great.
Thank you, Anna. This is beautiful. I just wanted to ask about the host-to-host variation in I guess, the number of different satellites that are contributing stars to a given fixed solar area.
Okay, yeah, so that's a really good question. So I have finished analyzing one of the halos, and that's the one I've largely been talking about, which is Tempest. I have 3 others that are redshift 0 and one that's almost there that I'm currently in the process of pushing through my pipeline. What I've seen so far is that, so Tempest is our lowest mass halo. And so we have, thus far, like preliminarily, we seem to have fewer dwarf galaxies contributing to that halo. Blizzard is the one that I'm currently working on, which is quite a bit more massive. It's a little above Milky Way mass, and that one seems to have at least 10 to 15 more, which almost certainly means that we're going to see more dwarf galaxies contributing to the pixels in any given line of sight. So I'm interested in particularly to see how much the radius that we can search changes with the different galaxies. I would view Tempest as being kind of a lower limit on that, or well, an upper limit on an upper limit on the radius, a lower limit on the number of dwarfs that you're seeing on any given sightline.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing more about it.
Great. We can take maybe one more question. Andrew, go ahead.
It's Andrew Punson. I think I probably missed something in what you were saying, but so to distinguish between different things that fell in, you were talking about using different ages on the HR diagram, but why necessarily are the star formation histories of the things falling in sufficiently different for that to work? Is that something specific to the halo you're looking at, or is that a generic thing that you expect?
So one of the things that hopefully will become more apparent as I look at the other halos more is how common that is. I know we have late infalling satellites, very late infalling satellites in most of the halos. And so that example is a technique that's only going to work for a specific subset of infalling satellites. There are going to be galaxies that have no late infalling satellites. And so that is kind of out for those unless we get really, really precise with our CMDs. But my hope is that we'll see more of that as we look at more halos with Roman. But yeah, I'm sure for some halos, it'll just be nothing.
Okay, great. So I think this leads us into coffee break. And then we'll resume at 11:30. So let's give a final round of applause for all our speakers.